All right, we're going to begin now. Thank you all for joining us. Today's webinar is on EU mechanisms, a cooperative agreement with the NIH. My name is Jonathan Adalist from the FreeMind group, and I will be giving the webinar today. And let's begin. Before I start, I'll get a few logistics issues out of the way. First of all, this is part of our FreeMind Summer School. You can join us every Wednesday for webinars on various topics. All of those that have already been in the past are available on our YouTube channel, as will be this one. It's recorded as we speak and will be on our YouTube channel shortly. And that is also true for the upcoming ones. And please feel free, if you see a topic that is of interest to you, to register and join us for that one as well. I will be giving out the slide deck to anybody who is interested. And like I mentioned, the recording will be available as well. And on top of that, if you do have any questions, please type them in and I will try to address as many of them as possible towards the end of the webinar. With all that being said, let's begin. So a few words about who we are first. We're a consulting firm, and we've been in this business for about 16 years now. This is inaccurate. We have 47 full-time employees at the moment, and we work across the life sciences, academics, medical centers, research institutes, and obviously with the industry, and really the full spectrum all the way up from tiny seed stage companies and all the way up to big pharma, and we submit about 350 applications every year. We view ourselves as a tool that our clients use to maximize their potential for funding, and essentially we do that through identifying the most relevant opportunities for the clients. We strategize to maximize the application's chances of award. We help manage complex project production processes, multifaceted projects, multi-PI, anything that's complex. We obviously are experienced and we help manage that. We lead the joint application writing process, and we also support, when relevant, contract negotiations with the agencies. If you look in general at non-dilutive funding, it is a pretty large pie of funding, so to speak, to be had. Estimated at about $50 billion, over actually $50 billion a year. And today we'll be focusing on new mechanisms which are part of the NIH's portfolio of mechanisms. And I'll elaborate in a minute about the U series and what that is. But generally speaking, out of that pie, we will be looking at actually the largest piece, which is the NIH. And maybe in a bit more detail, so the NIH budget is about $30 billion this year, and out of that, 26 is actually devoted to extramural research. So leaving the NIH and going out to projects with external organizations. So that's quite a hefty piece of the pie. So what is a U mechanism? A U mechanism is one of the NIH mechanisms, or actually it's a series of mechanisms. And there are a few things I have to say about them in general, but let's start maybe with the NIH definition of the U series, and I'll read this out. A support mechanism used when there will be substantial federal scientific or programmatic involvement. Substantial involvement means that after award, scientific or program staff will assist, guide, coordinate, or participate in project activities. So essentially, it's a more hands-on approach kind of award, kind of mechanism. The program officer will usually be the person this is referring to, and they will want to be involved in the process, part of the discussions, understand what's happening, suggest things. It's a collaborative agreement, a collaboration between the organization submitting and the NIH itself. Few things about that. First of all, I kind of disagree with this respectfully, in the sense that they say that the involvement starts after award. That is technically true, although I would definitely advise against starting that involvement after the award. In our experience, that is definitely not the way to go about it. Since the U portfolio to a program officer in many ways is their baby. They really care about these projects. They're involved in them. You want to get them involved as soon as possible. And I mean before you actually start even writing the application. When you're planning your application, that is the time to contact the program officer, discuss it with them, run your ideas by them, get their input on your ideas for the specific aims, for the research strategy, everything. And they, unlike other mechanisms, when if you approach a program officer and ask them for that kind of input, they will politely tell you to go fly a kite. In this case, that is they will really get involved and answer and participate, and that is very important. I'm not saying it's impossible to win without doing that, but in our experience, it's pretty damn difficult. On the other hand, and I'll touch on success rates in a moment, when you do it correctly, the success rates are actually not that bad at all. So again, respectfully disagreeing with this definition and saying that the involvement should definitely start from the get-go. Another issue here, and this is kind of touching on the same issue, is that the program officer with U mechanism has a bit more leeway in terms of who exactly will be receiving the awards. What I mean is this. Usually, and we can take it as an example, an SBIR, an R21, an R01, almost any other mechanism, those applications with very, very few and very specific exemptions to this, those that have the highest scores will always be those that are awarded. That is not necessarily the case with U mechanisms. Yes, you have to be very, very close to the pay line to have a chance. If you're not close to the pay line, you're not going to receive an award, that's for sure. Only top-notch science and top-notch applications will be awarded regardless. That being said, if there are applications that the program officer feels are a good fit for their U portfolio and that he or she have been more involved in the process and gave input, and that input was taken into consideration in this research strategy with the specific aims, and that application has a decent score but not quite at the pay line, that could eventually be funded, and a project with a higher score could not be funded. They really have a lot of input and say in this case. So again, and I will repeat this ad nauseum, I guess, during this webinar, but reach out, talk to them, get their input, get them involved. It's very, very crucial. All of that being said, it's important for me to mention that this can be a bit intimidating to many CEOs or CSOs when considering to approach this kind of a mechanism. They would say, okay, wait a second, are they going to take control of my IP? They can make decisions on what we can do, what we can't do? No, that's not the case. They can't make you do anything. They will not make you do anything. They will not make decisions for you. But having them as part of the process is a crucial part of this type of mechanism. And in almost every case I can remember, it's been a very positive experience for the submitting organization. We get very good feedback from our clients saying that it was invaluable, both the feedback, the process, the participation, the input, the fact that you get access in many cases to NIH resources is fantastic. But that's, again, specific solicitations, and we will touch on some specific examples. Just wanted to point that out. Don't be afraid of their involvement. It will not be overbearing or forcing your hand in anything. It's just real participation more than taking control of anything. So, in terms of stages of development that the U mechanisms or the U series is capable of funding, I guess the focus is a bit different than most NIH mechanisms. There is some discovery, and this is kind of laying it out based on the institute, because different institutes do have different priorities within the NIH. You can see that even discovery stage can get some funding, and that's specifically in the oncology space. But essentially, although it does fund from basic research and all the way through phase 3 clinical trials, I would say that the more ample opportunities would be in the preclinical and clinical trials areas, and that's an important issue because clinical trials are not necessarily easy to fund by grants, and new mechanisms are usually a very good way to do that. You can see there are a lot of check marks here in the clinical trials, and that's not common. So, okay, some statistics here. I see the numbers disappeared from this chart. So I'll try to remedy that and send out the handouts with the numbers in here. I do know the numbers, so I will state them. Basically, but what I'm trying to convey here is this. This is not all of the NIH funding, it's the major mechanisms, namely the RO1s and R21s, the SBARs, and the U mechanisms. There are P mechanisms and K mechanisms, and some less common R mechanisms. And there are quite a few different mechanisms, but the main ones, the most substantial sources of funding coming from the NIH are the R01 and R21, the SBAR programs, STTR programs, the U mechanisms. Less known in many ways are the U mechanisms, and I'm here to tell you that it should not be that way. And if you look at the pie here, it's about 10, and this is 2014 figures, about $10 billion were awarded through the U mechanisms. That's just a bit short of the R01 and R21s that were just short of 11 billion. So it's a very main source of funding that is often neglected. And just to put it in perspective, SBARs and STTRs that are fantastic mechanisms are about 650 million. So very, very significant sources of funding. And looking specifically at a comparison between the R01s and R21s and the U mechanisms, and this is specifically for domestic, for-profit organizations, no universities or anything like that, you can see that consistently, year in, year out, U mechanisms are used more to fund for-profit organizations than R01s and R21s, and that's a very surprising fact in many cases because, like I mentioned, they are in many, many ways much less known. And I would like to change that, and that's what I'm trying to do here today. Touching on the success rates, as I promised, you can see that there is some fluctuation, but usually they are moving around the 30% mark. That is extremely high for an NIH mechanism. Utilize that. I don't know why it is, if it's just because it's less known and there are less applications, if it's because of the involvement of the program officers and they're more invested in your project, and then it's hard to say. I wouldn't presume to know, but the fact is that the success rates are higher than most other mechanisms, and it's definitely worth utilizing. Some examples of U mechanism types, and these are just examples, there are obviously others. U01s are essentially the equivalent of an R01, usually both in scope and of research and scope of funding, timeframes, but the difference, as obviously would be in this case, it's a U mechanism, so it's a collaborative agreement, a cooperative agreement. A U10 is a cooperative agreement that is intended on funding clinical trials. UT1s and UT2s are the equivalent of STTRs. They're not the equivalent, they are STTRs, except for the fact that they're collaborative STTRs, phase 1 and phase 2. U43 and U44 is the same thing with SBIRs, phase 1 and phase 2 again. And UH2 and UH3 are interesting mechanisms. They are also incremental, as in they have a phase 1 and a phase 2, unlike UT1s and UT2s and U43s and U44s. I'm not aware of any mechanism out there that is only a UH2 or only a UH3. They are pretty much always kind of similar to a fast track or an R21, R33, wherein you apply for both phases. Once you complete the first phase, you move on to the second phase of funding. Unlike both of the examples I gave, the funding here is usually a lot higher. But in that sense, it is similar to those mechanisms. So, when should you submit a U application? I'll start by saying again, only after, this is the second point, but it's the most important one, only after contacting the program officer. And like I said, I will repeat this ad nauseum, but it is, if you take home one thing from this webinar, please do take home that if you're applying for a webinar, the first thing you should do for a webinar, for a U mechanism grant, is to contact the program officer. You have to understand, are you within scope? And that is a very main issue, because usually a program officer's U portfolio will have a direction. They're looking at a certain area and they want certain things to be done, and you have to fit into that. And if your initial proposal isn't exactly what they're looking for, then you have to tweak it and make sure it really is adhering to what they're looking for at the moment. You have to make sure you're in scope of what they're looking for, and that is the way to get funded. Is it translational? Is it basic research? Is it clinical trials? You have to really be a good fit for what they're looking for. How you construct a U application, and again, first thing you do, contact the program officer. I think I may stop saying at this point, but I hope you understand what I'm saying, but it is very, very important. You have to make it a decision. Do you want discrete specific aims or sequential? And obviously the program officer would be part of the decision. Discrete being, as an example, 3 separate specific aims that are not dependent one on each other, that converge to achieve a certain goal at the end point. Sequential would be a specific aim leads to A, leads to specific aim B, leads to specific aim C. Both are possible depending on the project, depending on what's necessary. Do you need academic collaborations, CROs, partnerships? These things, again, with the involvement of the program officer, you need to make a decision. Do you have the capabilities in-house to cover all the facets? Do you need to outsource? Do you need to collaborate? These are things you need to make decisions on. It's important to mention that virtuality is definitely acceptable in the vast majority, or even maybe all, of the U mechanisms I'm aware of. Obviously you need to carry out the research, but that can be either by outsourcing, it can be by using the funding you receive to hire personnel, rent lab space, and do all that, and create in-house capabilities that you previously did not have. So all of these are on the table, but the take-home message here is, as a virtual company, you are eligible to apply for U mechanisms. And the most important thing is follow the solicitation instructions, and that means basically, again, adhering to what your conversations with the PO bring to light. So, in terms of the budget, on top of the direct costs, you will receive 25 to 35% indirect costs on top of the direct costs, and that percentage is calculated out of the direct costs, or if you have a negotiated rate, obviously that will apply. A lot of the mechanisms are not capped in their budget. That being said, it is very, very important not to over budget, not to under budget. Ask for what you need. Both of those options will not look good, either because you're conveying the fact that you don't really understand what you're proposing to do and the costs of it, and everything that is basically attached to that, or that you're just asking for too much and you want the money. And that's obviously not what their goal is, to fund a company. They want a project to be funded. So I put here, contact the program officer 6 weeks in advance. Honestly, don't contact them 6 weeks in advance. Contact them whenever you're thinking of applying. If that's 6 weeks in advance, then okay. That's a bit tight to write an application in 6 weeks. I would say that 6 weeks is probably the minimum. Even if you started and you have an application and you just want to tweak it, then 6 weeks before the deadline is fine to contact. So I do stick by the 6 weeks, but I would actually recommend you start significantly before that, whenever you can. Let's talk about some examples of U mechanisms, and obviously these are just examples. There are many, many more. I won't go into much detail and specifics about the different examples, but just to show you that there's a really wide variety of applications that are, of opportunities that are out there that are relevant for different areas of research. So in oncology, as an example, the first one is quantitative imaging for evaluation of response to cancer therapies. This is a UO1, and the funding is up to $500,000 a year, up to 5 years, so $2.5 million in direct costs. And remember, you can add the 25 to 35% on top of that. Basically, what you have to do to be applicable here is to enhance the value of quantitative imaging in clinical trials for prediction or measurement of response to cancer therapies. And you can do that by one of two possible avenues, either development, optimization, or validation of methods and software tools, or to try to address challenges of integrating these methods into multi-center phase 3 clinical trials. The upcoming deadline is October 5th. So definitely worth approaching if this is something that's relevant for your research. Another oncology example would be assay validation for high-quality markers for NCI-supported clinical trials. This is a UH2, UH3. As I mentioned, it's incremental or staged. The UH2 phase funds up to $275,000 in direct costs. The UH3 phase funds up to $250,000 per year for up to 3 years, so about $750,000 in direct costs. All in all, over $1 million here is in an award. Because as I mentioned, you're pre-approved for both the UH2 and the UH3. It's one application. It's not two separate applications. In terms of scope, basically, it's to improve the development and validation of molecular diagnostics. You should have an assay that works in human samples and that is justified for development into a clinical assay. And that is where you should be in order to consider submitting. The next deadline is October 7th. Again, if this is relevant for you, by all means, go ahead. October is not that far in the future. In the area of infectious diseases, there are also a few interesting U mechanisms. This is we use this one quite a lot. NIH Clinical Trial Implementation Cooperative Agreement. Basically, this is for high-risk clinical trials in any area of research that is of interest to NIH. So that's allergies and infectious diseases. It has to be a priority to them, obviously, and to be relevant. And it's important to mention here that if your clinical trial, and there are specific designations, I won't go into them, whether a clinical trial is high risk or low risk. If your clinical trial is low risk, then there is an RO1 that we're not discussing RO1s today, but there is an RO1 that is equivalent, similar to this in both scope of funding and the period of funding, and it's just not a collaborative agreement, but a standard RO1 and is meant to fund low-risk clinical trials. The due date for this is September 11th, so that is really not far in the future, and if this is something you're considering, you really should get going about 2 weeks ago. Still possible, but get going. Another infectious disease related U mechanism would be, and this is a U mechanism SBAR. It's the NIH SBAR Phase 2 Clinical Trial Implementation Cooperative Agreement, a U44. There are two options here. You can submit either a direct to Phase 2 or a fast track. Direct to Phase 2 would be $1.5 million. Fast track would be $225,000 for Phase 1 and $1.5 million for Phase 2. The deadline is again September 11th. This is basically funds hypothesis-driven, milestone-driven clinical trials that, again, really in terms of the specific indications, the only designation is that it has to be of interest to the NIH, to be related to the research mission of the NIH. They also encourage, in this case, it's only encourage high-risk clinical trials. So you could technically submit a low-risk clinical study, but essentially, it's usually a good idea to do things that they encourage. So make sure you're a good fit. In this case, you also have to include a commercialization plan. As I mentioned, also September 11th. In neurology, there are a few interesting examples. Before I start touching on this, it may be worth mentioning that the NINDS last year actually went through a pretty extensive change in the way they fund. They changed a lot of their mechanisms to U mechanisms, although I can't say with 100% certainty if the UH2 and UH3 mechanisms did not exist before this change. Although I think they may not have. I don't. I'm not sure about that. I think they're new mechanisms that were created as part of that change. But anyway, the point being, they really changed the way they fund in many ways, and their funding is now more directed towards the U mechanisms. A lot of new interesting programs are are part of the U series, and we do anticipate that change will not be confined to the NINDS, and we expect other institutes to do that in the coming years. That behind us, let's look at the specific solicitations here. And again, these are examples. There, especially with the NINDS, there are a lot of others. So this one is the NINDS Create Devices. It's translational and clinical studies to inform final device design. UH2, UH3, as I mentioned, there's no budget cap here. That being said, the NINDS in this case advises not to exceed 1 million a year during the UH2 phase and 1.5 million per year during the UH3 phase, with funding up to 5 years. So first of all, there are restrictions on the amount of years you can be in UH2 and UH3. UH2 is up to 2 years, UH3 is up to 4 years. So actually, this could give you you could receive up to $7 million from this mechanism. It's a very substantial amount of money for a grant like this. Another thing about this, and there are quite a few mechanisms where there is no budget cap, but there is either the NINDS or a different institute advises not to exceed a certain amount. Unlike other mechanisms where saying that is basically saying that this is the cap, in this case, since the program officer will be part of the process regardless, if you really need a budget that does exceed that, speak with the program officer. If they're on board, maybe that's fine. It is good to try to adhere to what they recommend, but since the program officer makes the funding decisions, if they say you can exceed it here, it's not a problem, I believe in this project, then by all means exceed it. There is no budget cap here. And what I said now is true for quite a few mechanisms, and you'll see that in a minute. But basically, this supports translational and clinical studies for medical devices that treat neurological disorders. If that is of relevance, this is a great mechanism. The upcoming deadline may be a bit too soon for anybody who has not started quite a while ago. But the next deadline is in February, and like I said, $7 million is a very large sum of money. Definitely, if you're developing a medical device for a neurological disorder, by all means, I can't imagine a reason not to go for this. Another mechanism is Blueprint Neurotherapeutics Network, the BPN, a small molecule drug discovery and development for disorders of the nervous system. This is a U44, so it's an SBIR. This SBIR is always a fast track, so it will always be phase 1, then phase 2. There's no direct to phase 2, there's no submitting just to phase 1, always fast track. No budget cap here, and same points as I raised just a minute ago. They, in this case, advise not to exceed $400,000 for phase 1 and $4 million for phase 2. Again, a very substantial amount of money here. And like I said, they advise here and worth listening to, but program officer's input is always more valuable than any advice I could give you at this point. So listen to the program officer. Basically, this is to support companies to advance their small molecule drug discovery and development projects into the clinic. Same deadlines here. August, again, not very feasible if you've not started. So February, not that far in the future, and again, a very large award, almost $4.5 million. Definitely worth going for if this is your area of research. Another NINDS example, and this will be the last one from the NINDS. This is the NINDS Create Biodiscovery Track, optimization in preparation for development of biotechnology products and biologics. Also an SBIR. In this case, there are two options: a direct to phase 2 and a fast track. There's no budget cap again, and again they give recommendations that I won't repeat myself, but same take-home messages earlier with the program officer. Direct to phase 2 is the recommendation is not to exceed 2 million. Fast track is $500,000 during phase 1 and 2 million during phase 2. And the scope here is to discovery of therapeutics and biotechnology products. So therapeutic biotechnology products and biologic, for disorders that fall under the NINDS mission. So again, neurological disorders. Same deadlines as earlier, so again, February, and if this is for you, by all means, utilize this. And the last example I'm going to give here today is from the NIBIB. It's for bioengineering, and I want to sidetrack for a minute and touch on what the NIBIB is, because they're really not a standard NIH institute. Most, or probably all actually, of the NIH institutes are either devoted to a set of indications, an area of research, like the NCI with oncology, like NIAID with infectious diseases and allergies, etc., or to a specific population, be it the National Institute on Aging or Child Health or what have you. The exception to that is the NIBIB, that is the National Institute of Bioimaging and Bioengineering. And this is across populations, across indications, anything that is bioimaging or bioengineering or has aspects that are of bioengineering nature could be funded with help from the NIBIB. This mechanism is the NIBIB Quantum Program, Technological Innovation to Solve a Major Medical or Public Health Challenge. First, I want to touch on the word quantum there. So let's have a 15-minute quick explanation on quantum physics. No, just kidding. Actually, the word quantum here has nothing to do with quantum physics. Basically, it's just the use of quanta, essentially meaning a certain amount. They're looking for leaps forward and not just a slow, gradual improvement. I'm not really sure why they picked that wording. Anyway, no budget cap. NIBIB recommends not to exceed, and again with the same stipulations, 1 million per year, up to 4 years. So $4 million, even if you don't exceed that, that's a pretty fair amount of money. And this is essentially for development of biomedical engineering or biomedical imaging technologies that would achieve a profound advance over present-day approaches to the prevention, detection, diagnosis, or treatment of major diseases. So it's very, very wide. And like I mentioned, the NIBIB does not have a specific area of interest. It's more just to fund bioimaging and bioengineering related projects or projects with that kind of a component. Great mechanism if you have a project that has this kind of component or a project in general of this nature. The upcoming deadline is January 26th, so by all means do utilize this if this is up your alley. A few minutes to discuss in general how applications are reviewed in the NIH, and this is actually from the NIH website itself. At least it was a couple of years ago. I don't know if they still have this on their page, but generally the review process has not changed. They will judge you on 5 criteria: leadership, environment, significance, innovation, and scientific approach. So do you have the right leadership in place, the right PI, the right management for the company? Do you have the experience, the knowledge? Do you have the right environment, be it lab space, be it personnel, be it equipment, everything that is necessary for the project? Is the project of significance? Is there a real unmet medical need here? Is it innovative? Is your approach different from other approaches, and is it better? All of the answers to these questions need to be yes, but assuming they are, what will really determine whether you're awarded or not will be the scientific approach, the specific aims, and in our specific context with the U mechanisms, whether or not the program officer is on board with your scientific approach. Very, very important. I know I said I would not repeat it again, but I just did. Essentially, this is a risk management process. What they're doing is they are weighing the strengths of your project, and what we just discussed are the strengths, with the risks. And so you need to know how to present it in a way that emphasizes your strengths and not only tries to minimize the risk, but also conveys that you know how to deal with any adverse events that will happen, unwanted results. You have to really make them understand you know what you're doing, you know how to advance, even if things do not go as planned, you know what to do. And that will reduce the risk as far as they're concerned and increase your chances of being awarded. So we take a very systematic approach. We try to always know, and this is true in general, but again, much more true with U mechanism or the U series of opportunities. You have to understand the interests of the agency and focus your project application. Ask for what's necessary. I touched on this. Don't ask for too much. Don't ask for too little. Present a complete project covering all the different facets. Leverage on collaborations when necessary. You don't need to collaborate, but if you have a gap in your capabilities, then you definitely should collaborate or outsource or regardless, cover all. Basically, this is touching on the previous point of presenting a complete project. To maximize your chances, you have to target the right mechanism. There are different pockets of money out there, different sizes of awards, different success rates. You have, in order to really make sure you're doing this correctly, you should look out at everything and assess them and make sure you are approaching the right targets at the right time with the right project. And we call that a strategic assessment, and create a multi-submission strategy. That's how we do it. We assess the landscape, we create a strategy, and then we start acting upon it. About our team, 45, actually 47, as I mentioned, full-time employees, a smaller team of analysts, and our managers and consultants. At this point, I'd like to thank the manager of our professional department and our chief analyst, Guy Harchin, for helping with the statistics for this webinar, and also basically this is our scientific leaders, so to speak, the senior analysts, manager of the consulting services. And I touched on this, but a few words about how we advocate doing it. Basically, like I touched on, strategic side and grant production part, plan the different grants you're looking to submit, and then submit them one by one, always revising the plan, always looking back on what is out there, what has been issued, and how really to maximize both your opportunities and your chances of award per award. The way we do it is in this kind of I guess, cycle, where it starts with the client's R&D funding needs. We create a multi-submission granting strategy, as I mentioned, translate that into a short-term plan, execute it grant per grant per grant. They're reviewed, hopefully awarded, and round again. And that is the best way in our experience to maximize this field of funding. And again, this is true for U mechanisms, maybe even more so than others, but this is true in general. At this point, I would like to take some questions. So if you have a question that you have not yet typed in, please feel free to do so now. Let's see here. So, this is a two-part question. Basically, are non-US organizations and are non-academics eligible for these mechanisms? So I'll start by saying the answer is yes to both. Non-US, there are some mechanisms sometimes that are restricted to domestic organizations, but generally speaking, the vast majority are definitely not restricted in that sense. So in much more cases than not, these mechanisms are open to companies and organizations around the world. And actually basically answered the second point too. Yes, it's definitely open for companies. Like I mentioned the statistic earlier, significant amounts of money are going to for-profit organizations every year through the EU mechanisms. So definitely. I see here some very specific questions that I'd be more than happy to address in emails, but I don't really see a point in raising them here. Let me see. A few questions about our fee structure. Again, be more than happy to discuss that in person or on the phone at least. Okay, I guess, yeah, not seeing any other general questions. So thank you very much for attending. I hope you enjoyed it, and like I mentioned, you will be receiving a link to the recording, and anybody who wants the slide deck is more than welcome to contact me as well. I'm Jonathan Analyst for FreeMind, and thank you very much for attending.